Hello and welcome to this channel. My name is Dick van Oeveren and today I will be showing you user roles on the Aruba OS switches. In traditional environments, what we have is from a radius perspective, if you have clients accessing the network through 802.1x or Captive Portal, the radius enforcement is done from the radius server. So in this example we're using ClearPass. So what we have is the VLANs and the ACLs, etc. They are pushed from the radius server. With user roles, what we can do is we can configure those parameters on the switch rather than on the radius server. And what we do then is from the radius server, we can push a specific VSA that triggers the user role on the switch and applies those settings from that user role to the port. So first step is to show you the configuration on the access switch. So let me just show you the traffic classes that I've configured. So we use those traffic classes to allow or block traffic from specific sources to destinations. So what we have is we've got a couple of classes here. First one is the HTTP class. This traffic class will allow traffic to go will allow traffic for TCP port 80, so HTTP traffic to any destination. We have a class any that allows all traffic. We have a class CPPM. That one allows only traffic to allows only traffic to the ClearPass server. We have a class DHCP DNS, which allows traffic to DNS services and DHCP services, and we have a class internal that only allows traffic to go to a specific subnet, which in this case is the services subnet. And now what we do is we assign those classes to different policies. So what we have is we have configured 3 policies. One policy allow all, one policy user for the guest redirect, and one policy for untrusted network. So what we're going to do is we're going to create user roles and to those user roles we apply the different policies. So for example, the policy allow all, we will assign this to the user role for the employee, so for the corporate. And then we have a policy called guest redirect, and what we're going to do is we're going to assign this policy to the user role guest redirect. So the guest redirect user role is used to redirect the traffic to the captive portal. And that's also what we see here. So for this guest redirect, we are permitting DHCP DNS traffic because your client needs to get an IP address, otherwise it cannot reach the captive portal. We assign the CPPM class, so that means that the client can reach the ClearPass server for the captive portal, and we are redirecting HTTP traffic to the captive portal. And then we have the third policy, which is policy untrust. We are using this policy for guest access. So once the guest has been authenticated on the captive portal, we are allowing DHCP DNS traffic. We are denying the traffic to the services network, so the 10.1.2.5.4 network. So that's the class that we've seen before. And we are permitting any traffic. And then the next step is that we are assigning those policies and some other parameters to user roles. So if we issue the show user role command on the switch, you can see the list of user roles that we have been defining. So let me just first show you the guest user role. And what you can see is that we have a policy untrust assigned to that user role, and we are assigning VLAN 13. So once the user has authenticated as guest, this VLAN and this policy will be assigned. And then we also have the user role guest redirect. Let me show you that one. So what we have is we have a policy guest redirect assigned to this user role. We are also assigning VLAN 13. And what you see here is we have a captive guest redirect profile. And this is also something that we have configured on the switch. So what you can see here is if I do a show captive portal profile, I have configured a URL here that will be used by this user role, guest redirect, to redirect the traffic to a specific captive portal. And in this case, this is the captive portal, one of the captive portals that is configured on the ClearPass guest manager. And then there is a third user role, which is the employee user role. So let me show you that one. And this one has the policy allow all defined, and we are assigning VLAN 10 to that user role. So any user that is accessing the network with employee credentials using 802.1x will be assigned this policy and will be assigned to VLAN 10. And then finally, let me show you the full running config, because we need to configure some additional stuff as well, obviously. So we've got the traffic classes. We have configured the radius service here. You can see that here. We're using dynamic authorization because the dynamic authorization is used for changing VLANs after authentication. And the other thing that we have is the accounting. We need to enable accounting, and we have to enable the user role functionality. That's what we're doing here. And we have to enable the port access here for EP radius. We have to enable the captive portal. So you can see the captive portal profile here. And we also have to activate the access ports for 802.1x. So that's the top bit here. And for MAC authentication. Now let's find out what we have to configure on the ClearPass Policy Manager. The first step, what we're going to quickly check is the guest part. So what we're going to do here is we are going to look at the web logins. So what I've created is a web portal page, wired guest. So what you see here is that the page name has to be the same as the portal definition on the switch. Vendor settings, Hewlett Packard Enterprise. We are using credentials here. We are not making any additional checks using a specific skin, so that's the look and feel. And the other thing that we have to check is the login delay. The default value of the login delay is 60 seconds, and we can set it to 20 seconds for this web page. Now for the configuration. So what we've done is we have configured some stuff here. So what we're going to do is the user authentication takes place against a Active Directory. So we've defined an Active Directory and we have created role mappings. So first thing is you create roles. These are just placeholders, and then what we do is create the role mapping that maps the AD to specific parameters here. So what we've created is we have created mapping rules for this role mapping, and basically it says that when a user logs in with specific credentials, for example employee, and the employee in the AD is a member of the group employees, then we have assigned the role name ID AD employee here. And we do the same, for example, for guests, contractors, voice, or other other groups. So, for another example, if you are a guest member, so for the Captive Portal, you log in with a guest username, and that guest username in the Active Directory is a member of the guests group. We have assigned the AD guest group. So what we are defining then is we have 3 steps. So we go through 3 steps. So we have the profiles, we assign the profiles to the policies, and we assign the policy to the service. So let's start with the profiles. So what we have is we have 3 profiles here. So let's start with the employee profile. What happens is that when a specific service is selected for an action, a specific policy is triggered, and that specific policy triggers a profile. So for example, if you would log in as an employee, what will happen is after successful authentication, the employee user role value VSA will be pushed to the switch. So, and then that user role will be activated, will be triggered on the switch. And what we have is we have 2 additional enforcement profiles. We have one for guest, and this one is pushing the HPE user role guest value. And we have a guest redirect, which will be pushing the HPE user role guest redirect to the switch. Okay, so the HPE user role is part of the Hewlett Packard Enterprise Dictionary. So let me just quickly show you the dictionary. For the Hewlett Packard Enterprise. So what you can see here all the Radius attributes. So one of the attributes is user role. If you cannot find this user role attribute in the dictionary, it might be that you have an older dictionary loaded, and what you can do is you can download the latest dictionary from the Aruba downloads web pages and import that dictionary. Right, so you can use that import button here. Okay, going back to the configuration. So we've looked at the profiles, and then what we do now is we check the user role policies. So what we have is we have 3 policies. Let me just show you the first one. It's the 802.1x policy that is used for the employees, so for corporate access. And we have some enforcement rules here. So the default rules deny access policy, profile, sorry. And then what we have is we assign the profile. So if my role equals AD employee, so my role mapping AD employee, I have to assign the user role employee. So if my role mapping is triggered, I can then trigger the profile user role employee and push that to the switch. There's another one called a MAC authentication. So what we do with MAC authentication is we do a enforcement here for AD guest. So if you are a member of AD guest, we are pushing the user role guest, and if the user authenticated role appears, so if the user is authenticated, we have the user role guest redirect. Right, and my default profile is user role guest redirect. So if your authentication was not successful for some reason, it will be applying the user role redirect profile again. And then the third one is the port bounce. So what happens is that for Captive Portal, you have 2 steps. So the first step is that you have a MAC authentication. And MAC authentication takes place, and that MAC authentication automatically updates the endpoint database. Once the MAC authentication is done and the web authentication takes place, once the web authentication is successful, it will issue a port bounce. A port bounce is basically disabling and enabling the port again. So what will happen is that a port bounce will trigger a re-authentication. Now with the re-authentication, the authentication information is already in the endpoints database. So what happens then is that a second authentication takes place, but it will be based on MAC authentication. So the second authentication will be successful and the user is granted access. And then the third step is the services. So you can see here we've got 3 services, one for 802.1x, one for web authentication, and one for MAC authentication. Let's take the 802.1x first. So what we see here is the service summary. So what we're doing here is one of the things that I'm adding here is a attribute service rule that is looking at the NES identifier. So if your NES identifier starts with this value, then this service is triggered. So let's quickly go through the tabs. Using authorization here and authentication, we're doing PEEP or TLS, and my authentication source is the Active Directory. My authorization source is also the Active Directory, and what I'm doing is I am assigning the AD role mapping here, so you can see the list of AD role mapping. So if you are for 802.1x, if you are a member of the employees group, this service is using that role mapping group. And then the enforcement is done here with the user role policy 802.1x that I just explained. Going back to services, let's take the web authentication here. It's a web-based authentication service, and the authentication is done to AD. We're using the AD role mapping again, and we are issuing the user role web authentication port bounce. So once the web authentication is successful, we are enforcing this policy. So the port will be bounced and a re-authentication will take place. And then the third one is the MAC authentication. So for the MAC authentication, basically what we want to have is we have to, the MAC authentication has to automatically authenticate all MAC addresses. So if I go to the authentication tab, so what you can see here is we are allowing all MAC addresses here, and we are using the endpoints repository as authentication source. So one of the things is once you've done the MAC authentication, automatically the endpoints database is updated with the MAC address. And then we're not using any roles for this one, and we are pushing the user role policy MAC authentication. The other thing that we have to enable for the MAC authentication service is that we have to enable the used cached results radio button. This allows you to reuse the MAC address information that has been stored from previous MAC authentications. So let's put it to the test. So what I've done now is I've connected a 802.1x client to port 3, and if I do a show port access client detail 3, what I can see now is that the port is now in connecting mode. So I haven't authenticated the client yet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log in to the client with the employee user credentials, and what I'm going to do now, so I've logged in and I'm going to check the port access information again, and what you can see now is that the client is authenticated and the client name is employee1, and you can see that the user role employee has been pushed to this port. And let me just show you the access tracker. Access tracker here. You can see an accept coming from ClearPass with all the relevant information. And just let me show you the output. I am pushing the Hewlett Packard Enterprise VSA user role employee to the switch. And now for the captive portal. So what I've done now is I've connected a client to port 3 that does not have 802.1x. So I'm using the captive portal functionality here. If I do a show port access client detail 3, you can see now that it is in connecting mode and the user role information guest redirect is pushed. Now if I am launching a web browser on the client and navigate to a website, what I will get is I will get the captive portal information, and once I've logged in, so I've logged in now on the captive portal. If I do a show port access client, you can see now that nothing's happened. So what happened now is that the port bounce has kicked in. And then after a few seconds, if I issue the port access client detail 3 again, what you can see now is that the user role guest has now been pushed. Okay, and the user has guest access. Let me show you the access tracker. So what we can see here is we can see 3 entries here. So we have a radius entry for MAC authentication, accept. So what happened here is that the endpoint database has been updated, and you can see that the guest redirect role, user role, is pushed. You can see also a port bounce, and then what we have here is we have the web authentication, which is pushing the port bounce host. So after successful authentication, the host port is bounced, and then in the third authentication, it will authenticate automatically after the port bounce, and it will push the guest user role to the switch. And that's all working. So this concludes the demonstration of user roles with Aruba OS switches. Thank you for watching and have a great day.